Hi Romans Bible Study Group, it's Dave Opterbeck. I'm making this video to kick off the first week of our hybrid online study. So I've posted some introductory notes to the website, and I hope you get a chance to look at those. It provides, I hope, some decent background on what it is that we're reading, where this letter comes from, when it was written, when it was likely written, and a little bit about Paul, who wrote the letter. And what I want to do this first week is for all of us to sit down with the letter, use a good English translation like the NRSV or the NIV. For this, try to avoid using a paraphrase like the Message. And sit down and read the letter from beginning to end in one sitting. You'll see it's dense, but it's really not that long of a document. And in doing this, first, after reading some of that background material, try to imagine yourself in that first century church in Rome. You haven't really met Paul in person yet. You may have heard something, you've probably heard something about Paul, and you're hearing this letter read aloud, and that's the way it would have worked, for the first time. And in that context, what are some of the things that are striking you about this letter? What are some of the themes? What are some of the even cadences in the language? Of course, we're reading in English, we're not reading in the original Greek, but even in a translation, you get a little feel, if not for the actual cadence of the language, at least for the kind of flow of the language and really the power of the language that Paul is using here. And what are some things that you can imagine hitting you as you're sitting there in that first century congregation, whether you are one of the Jewish Christians in that congregation or whether you are one of the Gentile Christians in that congregation. And then step back for a second and think about how this is hitting you as you're reading it. And pay some particular attention, since we are reading this together as a Christian congregation, a group of Christian readers, hearing this text to us today. What do you hear it saying to you? And even more, if you quiet down and listen a little bit, what do you hear perhaps the Holy Spirit saying to you? I do think it's really important to have some expert background on where a document like this is coming from, and that's why I'm trying to give you some notes that I'm drawing from some sources that I believe are reliable and interesting to think about. But it's also important to remember that us as a group, as readers, don't have to be experts to hear what God is saying to us through the text. We will be so much more enriched if we understand the background the experts are giving us, and it will help us avoid what could be some real obvious mistakes. But God is going to teach us. So what is God teaching us as we listen to this text? Now, as you read it, there will be things in this document that are going to strike you as really troubling. Some of that, I think even most of that, is good for us. We want to hear the strangeness of the Bible, what the theologian Karl Barth called the strange new world of the Bible, and we want to allow that to challenge us, to challenge our modern presuppositions, and maybe to shake us up a bit. There are some things you're going to read, and particularly in Romans 1, that are really going to cause trouble for some of our modern understanding of things. And that's okay. I have a explanatory note, actually a relatively lengthy post that I'm going to share with you at some point in the next week or so that offers some thoughts of mine on the hermeneutics, the way that we hear this original context in the first century and try to apply it to our context 2,000 years later. So don't get discouraged by that. Allow that to sit with you a little bit, and we'll talk together about some ways that we might think about that. So for this first week, as you are reading, when you're done kind of reading through the text, come back to the bulletin board, and I will post a separate video if you don't know how to use a bulletin board like this. It's pretty simple. And just jot down some thoughts about some of the things that struck you as you read through Romans. First, in putting yourself in the shoes of a first century hearer of the text, and then you today sitting here in the 21st century reading this text. So I hope you enjoy this, and I hope it's fruitful for you, and I hope you have a great week, and I will see you on the online bulletin board over the next week.